Serious, people who have accidentally caused the death of another person. What happened? I've posted this before in more detail, but the truncated version is when I was 16 years old I hit an 87-year-old man after he ran stop sign. I was with him holding his hand when he died on the sidewalk. He had a heart attack. They weren't able to determine if he had the heart attack before the accident, which would explain why he blew through the stop sign, or if he had one as a result. His family was very gracious and I am very grateful for them. His son called me the day after it happened and told me his mom had died 6 months prior. His dad had been very depressed, and while they were sad he died this way, they were happy to think their parents were reunited. To hold a stranger's hand in his final moments. You are a beautiful person. I hope you are okay now. War survivor from Chechnya 94-96 war. I told a girl, maybe 17-year-old, to run out from the apartment building because I was so sure it was going to collapse. It didn't collapse, and she ran out into a hail of gunfire and died. I was so scared that I stayed in the building and it just never collapsed the entire time, so I left out the back. I often think about that, it was such a quick decision. She was right near the door. I was on my way out because the building felt like it was shaking, and I saw her and said, run out. The roof is gonna fall, and she ran out in a hurry and got blown apart by gunfire, shrieking in pain until she was hit again and presumably died. I wish I didn't tell her that, obviously. It still sort of haunts me to this day, especially her screaming. But I also know that I made the decision in goodwill, trying to save her life. And to be fair, the building really felt like it was going to collapse, and everyone was running out. Not just me, anybody would have told her to run as well. Nobody knew they were opening fire on the building. I know it sounds like lame justifications, but it is all I can think of to help ease my mind. Anybody would have done the same, I hope at least. The people that shot her are to blame, not the person who tried to save her. Turned left into my sister's driveway at 3 AM. A guy on a Harley was doing 60 miles per hour in a 30, with no headlight. My half-ton pickup left 4 feet of skid marks from being pushed back by the force. I still remember seeing him do mid-air somersaults. This was 1976. I was supposed to meet a friend to head to soccer practice, but he wasn't there when I got to where we were supposed to meet. I got impatient and decided to head to practice myself. He never got there, so I assumed he was sick or something. 2 days later my mom told me he got hit by a car and died after running out in the street to get a ball he was kicking while waiting for me. The timing of things seems like if I had waited just a minute longer he wouldn't have had to wait for me and would have lived. I was driving from a friend's house last November on a road I've driven a million times. I knew one area was particularly dark at night because the city hadn't replaced the street lights in over a decade. The dark area also crests a hill in a residential area between 2 crosswalks that are far apart, so people cross the road at the top of this hill. Knowing all this, I still never saw him coming. There was a huge thud and my window was cracked all the way across. I turned around and saw him laying motionless on the sidewalk. It was late and no one else was there, so it was just me, parked on a side street, and this body. I checked his pulse while I was on the phone with 911 but couldn't feel anything because I was shaking so badly. This was maybe a quarter mile from the hospital, so the paramedics were there before I even realized what happened. They put him up on a stretcher with this strange device that I found out later was to automatically compress his chest. The cops showed up and I finally saw my car with a flashlight. There was a large chunk of flesh and blood caught on the side of my car. I passed my sobriety test and they took me home. He lived for 3 days before dying due to complications of the accident, and was never conscious during that time. I found out through a friend of mine who's the editor at a local paper that the police were still considering charges. Also how I found out that he died. I was obviously a mess about the accident, but also the possibility of involuntary manslaughter. After the officer called me to tell me officially that he died, I consulted a lawyer and was basically told not to talk to the police again and to let them conduct their investigation. 2 grueling weeks later, I got a phone call at midnight from the officer who gave me my sobriety test. He worked 3rd shift. He told me that the guy was incredibly intoxicated and basically stepped into oncoming traffic without paying attention. With that info, I wasn't to be charged and I could go pick my car back up. The relief I felt was indescribable, but also terrible that I could feel so great in a situation where someone died. What made that feeling worst was that the officer told me the family of the guy were super concerned with how I was doing and that they wanted to tell me they didn't blame me. He was 24 and had just graduated college. It was his last night in town before going back to his hometown. I go to his Facebook page every once in a while just so I don't forget what he looked like. Sorry if this comes through as rambling, but I've been actually explained this in writing before. I'm at least partially responsible for 3 deaths. So I'm a weather forecaster. A few years ago I was forecasting for Afghanistan. Now, we were doing these forecasts from a base in the States, which means we had to coordinate our forecast with someone who was deployed to Afghanistan. Sometimes the downrange forecaster was really experienced, other times they weren't. It was a mixed bag. Anyway, I had been forecasting for this region for at least 2 years at the time of this incident. I was familiar with it, and I was actually in a supervisory capacity, simply overseeing all of the forecasts going out in my zone. Well, one day I was talking with one of my forecasters about the potential for large hail and how I'd like him to put that in his forecast. Now that's a big thing to put in a forecast because of how operationally significant it is. Aircraft must be put in hangars, missions are cancelled, assets must be protected, etc. So when it came time to discuss this with the downrange forecaster, he was absolutely against it. He didn't want to brief that to the commander because, again, missions have to be cancelled based on what you think will happen. If you're wrong, you've set back a lot of people and wasted a lot of time. So the deployed forecaster tries to argue against it, but his reasoning really just boiled down to I don't want to brief that. So when I wasn't looking, he essentially just pulled rank on my junior forecaster and forced him to take it out of the forecast. And so it went out to the base with no hail in it, only hinting at some vicinity thunderstorms. Well, when I noticed I was peeved, but I said screw it, we'll let him be wrong. This was the first time I'd ever wanted to put large hail in a forecast. Maybe we were over forecasting it. Nope. Basically right on schedule. A huge thunderstorm popped up and dumped large hail on the base. It did a few million in damage to aircraft, injured a Hello pilot who was pre-flighting his bird, and killed 3 Afghan National Army soldiers who had left on a patrol and couldn't find any cover. They wound up beaten to death by hail. That has always bugged me. They didn't need to die. We knew the potential was there and I basically just let an incorrect forecast go out that got them killed. I used to work a strange overnight schedule. 10-hour shifts Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'd try and keep awake the same hours on my days off, especially on Thursdays. This was a pretty rural area, so there wasn't much open at those hours except a gas station that had a tiny cafe area. I didn't want to keep people in the house awake, so I spent a lot of time at the gas station. I'd usually read or talk with the cashier on duty. I think she felt a little safer having someone else there too. One night a man comes in with a little boy and asks if they can use the bathroom. It's something like 3 AM. The kid looks sick or uncomfortable. To me it looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. After they're in the bathroom, the cashier and I look at each other. She thinks there's something off about this too. I went outside to get a description of the vehicle. After they leave, we call the police. The local police passed it along to the county sheriff's department and a local officer came to the gas station. He asked us a couple more questions and we listened to his radio to hear what was happening. A county officer spots the truck and pulls it over. After the officer gets out of the car, the truck backs into it and takes off. The police pursue him. We didn't get a lot of details after that. He crashed or abandoned the truck. The truck was on fire and loose rounds of ammunition was going off in the truck. I believe the boy was somewhere safe because I didn't hear any more about him. The guy tried to swim across a small but deceptively treacherous river and he drowned. That was close to 20 years ago. If I remember correctly, he was the boy's dad but did not have custody. He was recently released from prison and the truck was stolen. Good job. I like your sense about something being amiss. You did everything right. What happened afterwards wasn't a result of something you did wrong. My wife and I were both very sick with the flu. My father watched our 2 small children and even come to sit with me in the hospital. The day after I got out of the hospital, he got the flu and died a couple days later. I still feel guilty knowing that he didn't have to sit with my children, or that he didn't have to sit by my bedside, but he did. It helps knowing that he loved me so much that he was willing to put his life at risk to be with me. I just never imagined that the flu could have been so serious to hospitalized, much less kill someone. I hold myself responsible and I feel guilty for getting him sick. He got to spend his last few days with his grandkids and helping his child through a rough patch. If you could ask him, I bet he wouldn't regret his decisions at all. When I was 18, I was working the night shift in a nursing home as an aide. Part of my job was to turn the paralyzed patients every 2 hours to make sure they didn't get bed sores, etc. This one particular resident had late stage Parkinson's diseases and her muscles and joints were stiff and brittle and she was catatonic. As I was flipping her from one side to another, I applied light pressure to her leg to move her back a bit and this snapped her femur. Given her age and health, the doctors decided that surgery was dangerous and she would have to heal on its own, if at all. Because of this, we could no longer flip her, which resulted in bed sores. She eventually went septic from those bed sores and died of septic shock. I always felt so bad about that. That seems like it should have definitely been at least a 2-person job. Frick it, I'll reply. I haven't told many of my friends this story, but sharing it has helped wrap my head around what happened. It was about 3 AM on a Thursday last December. I lived in Fort Lauderdale at the time. I was heading back from a party at a friend's house, pretty bleary-eyed. I had slept for a few hours and then got in my car. I was running out of gas, so I stop at a gas station right off of I-95 before heading north to home. A guy walks up to me while I'm pumping gas and he asks for directions. He was older and a bit drunk. He came off as a yachty, and yachties are really common in that part of town. I had a bunch of yachty friends, so he didn't sketch me out, but I immediately kind of wrote him off. I told him to take I-95 north. He stumbles off and gets on his Vespa. Scooters are super common in South Florida, and then drives away. I go inside, get a drink, then sit in my car for a few minutes, waking up before going. I hit the highway and I'm cruising north when I see a ton of emergency lights coming down the southbound side. I remember thinking, oh crap, something's going down. I start paying closer attention to the road in front of me and there are lights in my rear view too. Coming up really freaking gassed. What happened next was kind of a blur and is NWS. There were recognizable body parts in the road. Part of an arm, an upper torso with the head attached, blood everywhere, bits and pieces of plastic and metal in the road and lumps of flesh or organ or something. I didn't see any of it until I was extremely close, but the image is something that has really fricked me up. I called my mom. She said I was incoherent and screaming about blood. FHP checked my car, which had blood on it but no damage, the next day, and the officer explained to me an older white male on a scooter had gotten on I-95 north. He merged inappropriately and was hit by a dump truck, and his corpse was hit by several other vehicles including mine. They closed I-95 for the entire morning, well past rush hour. The news article said that remains and debris were strewn across an area the size of a football field. I sold my car and moved. The first 2 months were very rough, but I'm feeling better now. Despite shaking ATM, TL, DR, I told a stranger to take the highway. He did so on a scooter. I drove through the aftermath of my advice. This is one of the hardest stories I've read in this thread. Yes, your advice wasn't right for him, but there's no way you could have realized this is what would happen. This is way too big a consequence for your little mistake. I'm so sorry you went through this. 7ish am on a Sunday morning. I'm heading to work at a small town at the age of 15 or 16. Come over a crest on a hill and have no time to react. T-bone someone making an illegal U-turn in a driveway. All I remember is veering off to the right and damaging someone's stone wall after the hit. Crawling out of the wreckage out of breath and stumbling to see if the other person was okay. Their vehicle spun multiple times and landed in a ditch facing away, but driver side visible from where I originally was. Driver wasn't there. Move along the vehicle and check the other side. Driver is hanging out of the passenger side window with a steady stream of blood from their skull. Bottom line for me is that I ask and implore everyone, please use your seatbelt. And don't make illegal U-turns like a dumbass. That would have solved the issue. My mom is Thai and my dad is American, so I spend most of the year in the US and summers in Thailand. When I was 8, my family and my cousin's family were at the beach in Siam. My cousin's son, James, and I had been playing in the ocean for hours by this time and we were both exhausted. Since we began playing, the water got much more violent with large waves as a thunderstorm was starting. As soon as my parents heard lightning, they yelled for us to come back to the shore and I just started swimming back without checking to see if James was following. When I walked up onto the sand, I looked back and I couldn't see him. We were much farther out than 2 8-year-olds should have been and James was too tired to keep himself above the water. I'm not sure what I could have done once I realized I couldn't find him, but I can't stop thinking about it. And when I go back to the condo there, I can't bring myself to get back into the ocean. It's a horrible situation and I feel for you, but it's unlikely that you could have saved James. Chances are you'd have come to harm as well. I really hope you'll be okay. 2 years ago, my sister was working at a dealership. Her husband and I were spending the day together until it was time to pick up sis from work. He had been drinking tall boys all day, so when it came time to get his gal, I took the keys and said I'm driving. He was mad enough that he refused to go with me. When I came back with my sister, he was nowhere to be found, but it was common for him to go on walks to calm himself down, so we didn't think much of it. 8 AM the next morning, state police were banging on the door. They told us he was struck and killed by a train while he was sleeping on the tracks. That's not your fault. You didn't let somebody too drunk drive. That's what you're supposed to do. Mine was through decision, but I felt as though I had personally done the deed. Freshman year of college, a bunch of friends and I had planned on going out camping for Memorial Day weekend. At the last minute, I changed the plans on us to go swimming and staying at my family's lake house instead, because beds and TV and stuff. First night and it in the water, we decided to swim out to the middle of the lake and just tread water and laugh and splash around. After a while we all swam back to the dock and I was second to last in front of Tommy. Tommy never got out. I dove back in but couldn't find him anywhere. We had no phone in the cabin, so after I ran back up the hill I ran barefoot down the gravel road to the main road, then to the nearest neighbor's house hysterical. They called the police and then at the end divers found him about 12 feet from the end of the dock. I blamed myself horribly for the change of our plans. I sat through the funeral numbly while his parents lied to me about how much he looked forward for weeks to the swimming trip. I stopped going to my honors classes and drank and smoked myself into an opium stupor for the rest of the semester and failed out of college. I kept abusing myself for 2 years until I finally got myself some help with my depression over it. At least his parents seemed sympathetic toward the situation. They just wanted you to not feel at fault. Seems like such a horrible loss, losing a good friend with a good family. Was skiing with a friend when I was still living in Colorado. We were going a good speed and enjoying the mountain. When we came back onto the main trail he was still going really fast. I yelled at him to slow down and an elderly lady ended up merging at the same time as he looked back at me. My buddy is a good sized guy and ended up colliding with this old woman. The ski patrol ended up grabbing her from the mountain and she was clearly in a lot of pain. She ended up dying from her injuries a few days later. After their investigation, my buddy and the woman were both in the wrong. He had to pay some fines but never got any sort of lawsuit. As many who have posted, I indirectly caused someone's suicide. I was not the whole reason, I know that, but I was the last nail in the coffin, so to speak. My best friend had been living with me for 2 or so years and was constantly making poor financial choices that fell on me and I would nag. We eventually got kicked out of one place due to this and I raged at him, but ultimately forgave him because even after all of his shortcomings he was always there when I needed someone. Fast forward to me being gone for the weekend. I get home and check my financials and see that there are some weird food or charges on there. I call the places and ask where they were delivered to and realize he'd used my credit card to buy food. Now I'd given him money when he needed it before because I will not let someone go hungry, but to steal was the last straw and I lost it, absolutely lost it, and just unleashes everything on him. He refuses to admit that he did it and tried to hide the pizza boxes. He proceeds to get absolutely wasted that night and tries to say that his grandfather was sick in the hospital to, I guess, get me to break my anger. Then next day I text him that he will either admit to it and pay me back, which seems easy, or I will have to get the cops involved. About 3 hours after that text was sent I get a hysterical call from my girlfriend that he has shot himself. It was a year this past April. I know I am told not to feel like I'm to blame, but I still think about it every day. Now I bite my tongue more and take care of what I say to people. I guess it's good that you are more careful with your words, but I don't know what else you can do differently when someone steals from you when they could have just asked. After my brother was born, my mother got pregnant again. She lost the baby though and told my brother and me that the reason was that he and I were bouncing around in the bed with her. We were 1 and 2, if not younger. She was a wonderful mother and never uttered a word to us in anger, but I never forgot hearing that at like age 6 and I still remember it with shame and sadness. I'm 57. Okay, I'm sorry, but that is both highly unlikely and was more likely a chromosomal anomaly or something in the photos, or even something that she had done. And that is literally the shittiest thing she could have possibly said, and I personally would have never forgiven her for saying it. There is almost no chance at all that you were at fault and she was looking for someone to blame. I'm not sure if this counts, but I wanna get it off my chest after reading these. My friend was a well-known and liked guy, very social, did drama, football and baseball in high school. Some of the best moments of my life was with him. One day he just stopped coming around. He would read my messages but not reply. He ignored anyone else. It was so bizarre. One day, he came to my house and it was like the good old days. He said he got into target shooting but his gun blew up because he fired a bullet that had been in the washing machine. He had some powder burns on his hands. He asked to borrow one of my guns and I said yes. 2 days later he shot himself with it. I've hated myself since. Most of our mutual friends hate me. His family hates me and I was barred from his funeral. I feel so bad I didn't see the signs. I miss you, Tom. I wish I could have helped you like you did me. I don't understand why anyone would remotely have a reason to blame you, nor should you blame yourself. If he didn't borrow yours he could have got a gun anywhere, or just used any other method. Odd, this thread pops up today and this will probably get beautied. 23 years ago this morning my older brother committed suicide. After 4 years of battling a drug and alcohol addiction he decided that he should end his life. Early that morning he called our house. I happened to be up and answered the phone. That night he had gone drinking with some friends despite him just getting out of rehab a few months earlier. It was his second stint in rehab in 2 years, so I got mad at him. I opened up and told him his addiction had ruined a large part of high school for me and how much pain he caused my parents. Not long after my dad picked up the phone and I ended up my last conversation with my brother with "quit being a frick up and grow up." He didn't leave a note, so I really don't know if what I said had anything to do with his decision. I miss you a lot, Billy. I essentially had the same conversation with my sister the night before. The next day she called me in tears and I told her I'd call her back. I called her back. She never answered again. I'm so sorry for your loss. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.